good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or whenever you may be tuning into the Growing Our Future podcast. We are always just humbled by the incredible guests that are willing to come on and share their time, talent, treasures, and testimonies and pour into others. As I always say, if you want to know what the future is, grow it. And we grow it by planting incredible thoughts, seeds, and seeing the possibilities of tomorrow. Today's guest, many of the listeners, viewers know this incredible lady, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be here today.
We're going to jump in here and we're going to get a little bit of a glimpse into Dr. Grandin's story, her passion for what she hopes to instill in others and accomplish as good in our world. But as we do with all of our podcasts, Dr. Grandin, I want to start off with the same question that I ask all my guests, and that is this. What are you grateful for today?
Well, I'm grateful that it's a good day today. And I've already had a really great podcast with people in Brazil, and they're interested in both livestock handling and in autism. And I talked about different kinds of minds. That's always something I want to talk about, is how different kinds of thinking are needed to get things done. And different people have different skills.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Dr. Grandin, I agree with you, by the way. I'm grateful that we have a beautiful day here to dialogue, to talk, and to share on a platform that's going to reach people that you and I have never met before. But hopefully your words and insights will be inspiration for them.
Okay.
Not only for themselves, but, a lot of times it's having that information may help them inspire somebody else.
Yes.
So that's why I appreciate your willingness to come on here and visit with us. So let's start off for those that might not have seen, which I don't know why you haven't seen the Temple Grandin movie, but for those that may not know a little bit about your background, give us a brief background into how you got to where you're at now.
Well, now I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. In fact, I've been here for almost 32 years, be 32 years in March. And earlier in my career, I did a lot of work on designing livestock handling facilities, did that for years. I worked on developing animal welfare auditing programs for companies such as McDonald's and Wendy's. And I was a severely autistic kid. When I was 3 years old, I had no speech. And I got very good early intervention. My mother always helped me develop my art skill and get good at doing things. I want to give credit to wonderful teachers I had, elementary school, my high school science teacher. And I had people ask me, well, how'd you get started in your career? One small project at a time, but also seeing doors to opportunity. A lot of people don't see them. And there's a scene in the HBO movie that I think is super important. And it's the scene where I'm in my 20s and I walk up to the editor of the Farm Arrangement magazine, our state farm magazine, and I get his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. And then I very quickly produced an article that was a summary of my master's thesis. And a lot of people don't see those opportunities, and they're everywhere. And those doors don't stay open very long. I got the card and I produced the article. And then I became livestock editor for that magazine. That really helped my career.
I want to back up just for a minute here, because you said something that when I think of our audience, Dr. Grandin, this broadcast will go in classrooms across the state of Texas, across the country.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of young people. You mentioned you're dealing with autism and what that was. For somebody that might not be familiar with that, kind of give them a little bit of an overview of what, when they hear the word autism, what would that mean to them if they were seeing that?
Well, autism ranges from somebody like Einstein, who had no speech until age 3, to somebody who cannot dress themselves. Now, when the kids are little, when I was 3 years old, I had no speech, rocking. It is a neurological condition, and it's very variable. I'm going to estimate that probably half the computer programmers in Silicon Valley probably have some degree of autism. Mm-hmm. And it is a true spectrum. And these are the kids where they're more interested in what they do. They oftentimes get a special interest. And let's say you have a young child and the special interest is cars. You want to broaden that interest. Let's read about cars. We can do math with cars. We can learn about how engines work, how batteries work for electric cars. In other words, take that interest and broaden it. Because when I was a little kid, I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. And my mother would say, well, let's draw the whole horse. Then you could read stories about horseback riding. See, these are ways you can broaden that interest. A big mistake that's often made is to sort of stomp out the interest. Now, if it's something like cars, there's all kinds of careers you can go into in cars. So let's broaden that interest so it's a lot less fixated.
That is very helpful. So in other words, young people, if you're an FFA member, an agricultural science student, or you're sitting in a classroom now and you hear that, or you're a teacher, I think there's a lot of wisdom there. Try to see and identify, and then be an encourager to explore those thoughts and encourage that person. Because to Dr. Grandin's point, you may be the support mechanism to inspire their greatness. Because you said along the way, Dr. Grandin, that there were people there that supported you and encouraged.
There really were. Like in high school, I had a fabulous science teacher. And then there was a contractor that helped me get my design career started. He was a former Marine Corps captain, starting a tiny little steel and concrete construction business. And he sought me out to design cattle handling facilities. And he helped me get my career started. He helped me set up my business. I mean, these are the kinds of things where you need mentors. And when we had a whole bunch of dip vats we built, and that was shown in the HBO movie. And one of the reasons we had a whole bunch of dip vats to build, scabies hit Arizona. Horrible for the cattle. It was real good for our business. We had lots of dip vats to build. And that got my business started, and we jumped on that opportunity.
Wow. Well, one of my favorite sayings is that, we were not created to be the Lone Ranger. And I always say that none of us is as strong as all of us. And when the
other thing I learned to do when you're different, I learned to sell my work. I would just show people my drawings. There's one of my drawings right there. And that's how I sold Cargill back in the late 80s. I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant because I sent some drawings very similar to the one there. They had a Cargill, pictures of jobs, a brochure, and some trade press articles. In other words, what I learned is when you're kind of nerdy and you're kind of different, you sell your work rather than yourself. This is where we need to sort of go around some of the regular interview process. You've got to get that work into the hands of the people that will care about it, like a plant manager or plant engineering department, not the human resources department.
Well, I'm going to say on a personal note, one thing that I like about what you talk about, when you talk about being visual and seeing things, I will tell you, of all the CEOs, of all the business leaders that I've dealt with, that's what I've got to be. I've got to see it. I've got to be able to see what it is that you're trying to accomplish, the mission that we're trying to achieve. And when people can do exactly what you've done, make it clearer for me to understand how to get to that end result.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I always want to talk about, the different kinds of thinking. And I talk about that in my new book, Visual Thinking, the hidden gifts of people who think in pictures, patterns, and abstractions. And I'm an object visualizer. That's the correct scientific word for my kind of thinking.
Say it one more time.
An object visualizer, which means that all my thoughts are pictures. And in the HBO movie, it shows how the word shoe was said, and then a whole bunch of almost like PowerPoint slides of shoes appeared. That is how I think. And object visualizers like me are really good at working with the mechanical things, art, animals, and photography. Those are things that my kind of mind's good at. Art and mechanics, they go together. Now, the thing that we're really terrible at is abstract math. I had a horrible time with getting through college math on algebra. I just never understood it. Now, your second kind of mind is your visual spatial pattern thinker. These are your mathematicians, your chemists, think patterns, chemistry, music, physics, where it's patterns rather than pictures. And then, of course, you've got your word thinkers, your verbal thinkers. Now, a lot of people are combinations of the different kinds of thinking. But when the kid gets labeled autistic or maybe dyslexic, you have an extreme object visualizer. And one thing I'm very concerned about, and I have a whole chapter in this book called Screened Out, is that my kind of mind, I'd have a difficult time graduating from high school today with all the math requirements. But the thing is, you need my kind of mind, because we are the mechanical thinkers. And I've worked with every major meat company. I spent 25 years in heavy construction, especially with Cargill and with Montfort's. And the people working in the shop, I call them the clever engineering department. Mechanically clever devices. They're inventing all kinds of devices at the beef plant. I mean, think, packaging equipment. And then your degreed engineers are doing the more mathematical parts: boilers, refrigeration, wind and snow loads, roof loads, power and water requirements. And you need to have both. But where we're losing it is in the clever engineering department. Because right now, if you want to build a poultry processing plant, the equipment's going to come from Holland. And it's the same thing true for the pork processing plant. We're paying the price in a lot of schools, and it's different in every state, for taking out the hands-on shop classes, paying a big price for that. And I know in Texas, you're putting some of these back in. But why is Europe, a high-wage country, making all this specialized equipment that we've stopped making? I think it goes back to education, because in Europe, you can choose in 9th grade, do I go university route or tech route? And they don't look at tech route as a lesser form of intelligence.
That's right.
It's a different kind of intelligence. I was working on these big, huge, gigantic Cargill plant jobs. And of course, I walked around the whole entire job, obviously, looked at everything. And it's a different kind of intelligence. And I think a lot of people who are verbal thinkers don't understand it. In fact, when I was doing a book signing for visual thinking, one of the talks was at a school. And I spent an hour with the principal, and he didn't know what visual thinking was, which really bothers me, because you need our kinds of minds, because we're going to invent mechanical things. Somebody has to fix all the equipment. Verbal thinkers tend to overgeneralize things, vague concepts. I have to think very, very, very specific.
We have a sponsor, and I know you probably know them, but I'm going to share this story with you because I think it's exactly what you're talking about. And that's Prefert Farm and Ranch Equipment.
Yes. I'm very familiar with Prefert.
And those guys are great. And when we were out there, it was interesting hearing their stories, because they dealt with professional engineers and these folks, and they said, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. And what does Prefert do? They harness the imagination of people there on site and say, what do you think? Can you see this? And they saw the answer that engineers couldn't see.
Well, you see, because that's picture thinking.
Yes.
Engineers are math and pattern thinking. That's the thing. Now, I was at a career fair just the other day for youth that learn differently, and our fire chief was there. And he told me about a firefighter in his department that invented a new water pump design to make the fire engine more efficient. I can't tell you how it works, because they're filing for patent right now. But it's the most beautiful design. So beautiful. And I can't tell it to you.
I think I saw it on the news.
It's visually a beautiful design for a better water pump for a fire engine. And fortunately, the fire chief's going to make sure that his firefighter doesn't get ripped off, and they're going to patent it, and he's going to make sure that he gets paid. But that's an example of something that coming out of the clever engineering department. He just saw how to make it work.
Something else that you said that I sure hope listeners that they heard what you just said. You said something a second ago. I will tell you, right here in the state of Texas, Dr. Grandin, I think when you look at the total workforce in the state of Texas, I think it's around 30 to 35% that have college degrees.
Yeah.
Now let that sink in. That means that there's a lot of really good jobs that are high-paying jobs, high-earning jobs, that people, to your point, they're not lesser. They are very much high capacity, high earning jobs.
Well, you see, the Prefert people, that's visual thinking. I also had did a little consulting with a company that made playground equipment, and they said they mostly hired industrial designers. Those are people that are visual thinkers, and it's seeing how it works. Now, lately, I've been on a lot of questionable elevators that I know are not getting serviced. And one of my friends got hurt in the door of an elevator that wasn't serviced just recently. Scraping in the shaft. I was at a fancy hotel in September, and the elevator would skip a floor, and the bellhop goes, "We get that floor on the way down." This is recent. I hear a lot of scraping in the shaft. Oh, I know they're not being serviced. And when I see elevator repair people, also escalator repair people, they're getting older and older. Last two airplane mechanics on my flights have been older. They had gray hair. I can talk about gray hair. I've got it.
Yeah.
And I'm very concerned about skill loss in these things. These jobs are not going to go away. I don't care how many computers you've got. An elevator is still a mechanical device. And until we get anti-gravity, it will be a mechanical device.
Absolutely. I just love it because, you go back to what you started with, what you see. And sometimes what we miss are the things that are right there in front of us. Simple things, just like the elevator.
Well, and it's right there. One of the reasons I like to bring it up, because most people don't want to get stuck in elevators. And that's something where they can often see them being repaired, and they can see the people that are doing it. Same thing with escalators. I went to a major airport. It wasn't Denver. It was another major airport. This was this fall. 4 people had an escalator all ripped apart. Looks a lot like meatpacking plant conveyors when you rip them apart. And 3 out of 4 were older. And the problem now with the stuff that I've worked on is the people I worked on, like at Montfort's and at Cargill, a lot of those people have retired. And the problem is they're not getting replaced. And I tell business leaders, and I've done a lot of corporate talks, the first step is realizing different thinkers exist. Now, when I was in my 20s, I thought everyone thought in pictures like me. I didn't know verbal thinking existed. See, the first step is realizing that they exist, and they've got complementary skills. You've got the clever engineering department, and I can tell you the Montfort Fab Shop was full of it when they were open. And it's closed now. I went by that building the other night, about crying when I went by that building. You see a lot of businesses shut down in-house engineering about 20 years ago. That made money in the short run because they could farm the work out to local shops. But as the local shops retire out, then you have a problem. And the one shop that's left is price gouging like you wouldn't believe. The educators don't see it because most educators don't know anything about heavy industry, any kind of industry.
I think you've I can tell you on my personal journey, I grew up at a boys ranch. I worked the feedlots, I worked the dairy barn, I worked the processing plant, I worked the meat fabrication, the slaughterhouse. I did every major ag job at boys ranch. When I went to Texas Tech University, obviously that's where I met our mutual friend, Dr. Kevin Pond.
Yes, yeah,
And,
he's great.
I worked in the meat shop there, but it was interesting that, I had to hold down 2 jobs to pay for my college. And it was, I guess I'm a visual learner because when I can see what you need me to do, I can do it.
I can do it. And the problem is now it's so expensive. There's no way you could pay for it going through college.
Yeah. Well, I think I've translated that technique into now as a leader. I've been the director for the foundation for 23 years, but I believe now I use those same visual techniques to see where I think the possibilities are for us to take ag education, to take the FFA.
Well, we've got to make sure that we keep those welding classes. And in my book on humane livestock handling, I've got lots of nice welding projects in here. Gate latches, things that here's best gate hinge in the industry right there.
There you go.
And I can make it in a perfect project for FFA welding. A gate you can open from a horse.
Looky there.
Just things like this. And I hope they keep those classes because there's a tendency for things to be getting more and more verbal. And one of the problems with verbal thinking is overgeneralization. That is the problem. Like I read stuff about legal stuff. This horrible word keeps appearing in many, many legislation, reasonable. What would be a reasonable length of time to maybe comply with some regulation? What does that mean? Reasonable. I see that word coming up all the time.
It's
all kinds of different legislation. And I'm going, what does reasonable mean?
it's funny
One
you
of the
say
things that
that.
made my scoring system work so well for evaluating the meat plant, it was very specific, like traffic rules.
Mhm.
They had to make certain numbers, like no more than 1% falling during handling at the beef plant.
I was in a meeting recently and they used that word reasonable.
Oh, I hate that word.
So I chimed in on them, and this is the question that I asked them. I said, "You're using the word reasonable, so let me ask you a question." I said, "How long is a piece of string? Is it this long or is it this long? Is this reasonable or is this
And
reasonable?"
I see that, but you see all these things with reasonable, commercially reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're talking about, let's just say, I can remember when one airline owned the whole Denver airport. That was about 25 years ago.
Mhm.
Well, is that reasonable for one airline to have
That
80%
much.
of the flights, 90% of the flights? That's not true now,
Mhm.
but that was true of, like, I've been here 32 years and I remember when it was true. Is that reasonable? Commercially reasonable?
Mhm.
It's actually in a regulation when you're deciding that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know what that means. There's a tendency for very, very verbal abstractions,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
I see, for me, nothing's abstract. I've got to have something I can say. And I'll never forget when I walked by a gate and there was a 747, I couldn't believe it, on the Denver to Kansas City route. This is years and years and years ago, because they wanted to squash the other airline that was on the same route.
Mhm.
You see, now that's something specific. And I remember looking at that plane, I'm going, really? Am I looking at the gate right? Is that really going to fly the Denver to Kansas City route? Like, you got to be kidding. This was like 25 years ago or so. But I'm going, really? You see, is that commercially reasonable? No, they
Well,
wanted to put the
I
other
am
airline,
excited
put the other airline off that route.
that the scope and the growth of career technical education in Texas is growing. That we are providing more opportunities for students to do the hands-on. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of core values that come from that. I know that in your career, in my career, when you're dealing with animals, people ask me all the time. They say, "Aaron, what separates those FFA kids from everybody else?" I said, because in the world of agriculture, if we don't do our job, something dies. If we don't do our job, if we don't care for it, if we don't provide for it, it dies. And I'm going to tell you, learning,
too,
that's what I mean. Anything,
that's right.
learning that way creates an inborn core value
Okay.
of sustainability, of problem solving, of critical thinking. And so that's why I'm such a proponent of what we do, because I think that we're making kids that are not only good agriculturalists, I also think we're making them better community members, better citizens.
Sorry to interrupt. That's still something I have problems with timing. I was at its career fair and I was talking, this is just the other day, talking to a special educator that said since her kids got labeled autistic, they were not allowed to go take the hands-on classes. This is ridiculous. I know people that definitely be diagnosed severely, quite kind of really pretty autistic. They owned metalworking shops, had 20 patents each. Since they're not formally declared and they're still in business, I can't say exactly what they do. One of them, it's mechanical hydraulic equipment. I'll just call it that. And it's sold around the world. Another one has a food factory where he designed all kinds of stuff in it. And I talked to him one time and he told me he would have been every diagnostic label in the book if he was a kid today. And he's designed all this very innovative equipment. And again, I have to be vague about what it does. I can't identify them. But this is what makes me want to pull out my hair when I go back and forth between the like the autism educational world and the industrial world. They don't get it. They don't understand it. And these kids are too much becoming the labels. Now, the people that I'm referring to now, these are people that are late 60s, pushing in some in the 70s now, and they're not getting replaced.
Well, I wrote down when you said this earlier in our interview, I wrote it down because I thought it really, I got it. It really struck me.
Yeah.
As you said that you were an object visualizer and it was art, animals, and photography.
And mechanics.
And mechanics.
Mechanics.
And I'm sitting
Now, the
here.
thing that's really weird is mechanics and art actually go together. Art, mechanics, photography, and working with animals, because animals don't think in words. They think in sensory memories. Art and mechanics, photography, and animals. Then your mathematical kids, they're going to be good at music. That's often goes together with mathematics, chemistry, physics, all of the mathematical stuff of engineering. So you need the whole team. And then you have the word thinkers, think totally in words. And word thinkers tend to overgeneralize. And they have broad concepts, but lack how we're going to actually achieve this concept. Like, for example, I remember when the power plant stuff froze in Texas. I heard all this abstraction. My approach to that would be I want a list of the power stations, and I want to know exactly which piece of equipment froze. I want to talk to the people in the shop, not the suits, and then I want to rank them in how easy or hard they would be, or expensive they would be to winterize. Where you're talking specifically, this one, maybe I can fix with a building over the stuff. What was frozen? What actual thing froze in each one of those power stations? Nobody was talking about it. That's how I would approach that problem. And then I could put them in a list from easiest to winterize to most difficult and expensive to winterize. All right, now I'm going to go to the mathematicians. Okay, let's say we can do 3 of them pretty easy. All right, mathematicians, can we at least do rolling scheduled blackouts if I have 3 of these stations and they're located here running? That would be my approach. It's a bottom-up approach. But I read all this vague stuff talking about, nobody talked about the specifics. And I know enough about equipment that if I went into those power stations, I went down to the maintenance shop, well, they'll show you exactly what went wrong. It's not that hard to find out. And I know enough about equipment to understand it. Now, it's up to the mathematicians to balance the power grid. That's their job. But nobody talked about it in a specific way. You see, you need both kinds of minds. I don't know how to balance a power grid. That's a mathematical job.
Well, I can tell you this. The good thing is I know some of the people that'll be watching this podcast, and there's some policymakers in Texas that will be watching this, and this will be good information for them.
But this is the thing I need to know. I want to make a list of the stations and where they're just their town names. So I'm going to call it by their town names. And then after I've talked to, find out what froze in each plant, then I'm going to rank them in difficult, most difficult, hard to fix to like easiest to fix. And then I've got to talk to people to balance the power grid. So I've got to at least have scheduled rolling blackouts. I'd rather not have any blackouts. Well, at least if I have scheduled rolling blackouts, that's better than totally blacked out. But let's discuss it in a very specific way. Now, I see it. In fact, I talked to a guy that built gas wells, and he explained to me exactly how they can be winterized for about $5,000 a well when you build it. And then he goes, you have to know how to turn those valves and buy good ones, don't buy cheap ones. Now I see that equipment. I have to actually look at that stuff when I drive by it. You see, it's not abstract. And I'm going, they talk about it in abstractions. I want to figure out how we fix it. Then I fight over who owns them. I can tell you right now, I'm strictly looking at the mechanics, and I'm going to call them by their town names, and I don't care who owns them. I'll just rank them by cost and ease of winterizing them. That's my approach.
I want to move in another direction here.
Okay, but that's just how I would approach that problem. I did a lot of thinking about that.
I love it.
Now I'm seeing the hotel that had ice chandeliers coming down. Oh, that was awful.
I've had the pleasure of hearing you a couple of times speak in public, and I remember you spoke to the International Association of Fairs and Expos. And we had a brief exchange that day, but I'll never forget a comment that you made, and I want to talk about it a little bit.
Okay, all right.
I'll never forget when you said that we need to expose more young people to expos in agriculture and to animals because they may find a career.
Well, I'm an example of that. I came from back east, a non-ag background, no cattle in my childhood, and I was exposed as a teenager. I went away to a special school because I got thrown out of a regular school for throwing a book at a girl and called me a retard. And they put me to work, and I took care of the horse barn. They also had a 12-cow dairy, and I learned how to milk cows there. And then when I came out to Arizona, I was a teenager, So I got introduced to the beef industry. So that's exposure. I was exposed to it. You know, I've looked at a lot of career histories. First of all, it starts with exposure and then mentoring. And I had a very important mentor in Jim Uhl, the contractor, who seeked me out to do jobs. And kids today are not getting exposed to enough options. No, it wouldn't have been in the cattle industry if I hadn't been exposed to it.
Wow, I didn't realize that you and I had such similar career paths, because I got sent to the boys' ranch because I wasn't necessarily the best kid, and I milked cows and also worked in all the ag jobs there at the ranch.
I milked cows and I basically ran the school's horse barn for 3 years. Didn't do much studying. 9 stalls cleaned every day, feed them, put them in and out. I basically ran the horse barn. I did everything except the financials.
Wow. So let's talk about that now. You travel around the world. I mean, you are definitely an influencer in the world of agriculture, animal agriculture. For the young people that may be listening right now, and they're wondering about their future, they're wondering about job opportunities. Are there any careers available in agriculture? Are there any opportunities coming down the pipe in agriculture?
Well, there's lots of opportunities. I tell students, do internships. If they're in college, I'm a university professor, do internships. Jump on doing internships. Volunteer to be in professors' research projects. Then you can start to see what you would like and what you'd not like. Yesterday, I was outside and my next door neighbor stopped by. He was walking his dogs, and he told me about a high school student that was wanted to be a veterinarian. And I suggested that the student shadow a veterinarian. You need to go into a pet practice, even if you're cleaning cages, and just find out what a pet veterinarian does. It's very important. Try careers on, because sometimes a career isn't what you think it's going to be. Try it on, and then you might go, I love this, or maybe you might go that you hate it, but you tried it. One of the reasons why a lot of students that are interested in animals want to be a veterinarian, it's the only animal-oriented career they're exposed to. You know, you take a lot of students, that's the only thing they're exposed to. And then what happens in our university and in many, many, many other universities, the animal science class starts out, 75% want to be a veterinarian. And then that drops down to about 25% in the junior year. This is true at Colorado State, it's true at other schools too, because they discover interesting careers you can do that you can do with a 4-year degree. They don't, careers that they don't even know exist, you know, like nutritionist, animal geneticist, food safety, just all kinds of stuff.
So that's good. So there's a lot of opportunity, and you're seeing it all over the world.
Well, and I wanted, you know, I just gave a talk to Brazil and was talking about, we talked about the different kinds of mines, talked about some basic cattle handling stuff. And I find on the cattle handling, I still have to talk about basics. Things like not yelling, moving small bunches of cattle, timing bunches of cattle. I was just over at one of the big plants. Oh, they got 2 older people there. They do a great job with handling the cattle.
One last topic here.
Okay.
And I think I kind of know, you've actually kind of said it probably throughout, but I'm going to try to zero it in a little bit here. If you were giving advice to a young person, to an educator, on tips to be successful, what would be 3 tips that you would suggest?
And how old a young person?
These are high school kids.
High school kids. Okay. Get out and try different things. Get out and try different things. And then you find out what you love, but you also might find that you tried something, you just hated it. And that's also important to do. Try different things. Watch for doors to opportunity. A lot of people don't see doors to opportunity. There's one scene in the HBO movie Temple Grandin where I go up and I get the editor's card for our State Farm magazine, because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. I saw that door, I got the card, I produced the article. Too often, people don't see sort of these back doors into jobs. Half of all good jobs are through contacts and through things like that. And I saw that door and I went through it, and And then I became livestock editor for that magazine. The other thing is, I've had some students ask me, well, how did you get over obstacles? And I said, it's one thing at a time. This was at a veterinary college. It wasn't ours, but I think it was Michigan State. And I had a student ask me, how do you get over obstacles? I said, right now, you're in a class that's very difficult, and you need to pass this course that's difficult. Work on that right now. Get a decent grade in this class. That's what you need to do. It's step by step. That's what you do. And I started my business, one small job at a time. But people don't see doors to opportunity. They're everywhere.
Well, Dr. Grandin, I can't say thank you enough. And I say thank you enough, not just because you did this podcast. A good friend of mine, her name was Kristen McCullough, was Susan Forte.
Okay.
Susan was Kristen McCullough's partner in the space shuttle program, and Susan was was a teacher in space from Florida.
Yes.
And I'll never forget Kristen McCullough's quote. She said, "I touch the future I teach."
Yep.
And when I think about,
I'm going to cry now because I went to the Houston Museum and I walked on that jet bridge scaffold thing that they go on the shuttle, and after we were taking pictures and stuff on it, and then I got around on the other side of it and I realized that was Kristen McCullough's jet bridge.
really,
that makes me cry.
So here's another connection, Dr. Grandin.
Yeah.
Ellison Onizuka was on that flight, and Ellison Onizuka was an astronaut from Houston that wore the FFA patch on his astronaut lapel. And I had lunch with him, and he told me to be watching for him, that he was going to be taking pictures of Halley's Comet. And
Stuff just makes me cry because I went to that museum and that scaffold jet, I just call it a jet bridge, it goes. I was walking around on that, and then when I went around on the other side, I saw the sign, and I go, oh, I was walking on Kristen McCullough's jet bridge. Made me.
Well, Dr. Grandin, that's what God has blessed us with, your talent, because you have touched the future. You've made
and I can remember when I had when the accident happened, I had just gotten blueprints copied at Blueprint Place, and I pulled up to the post office to buy some stamps, and the Challenger was destroyed. I went in and bought the stamps, and then went over to the bar next door and watched the replays.
Yeah.
That was.
I pulled off the side.
Now the other thing is, the engineers had warned they launch should be postponed because it was too cold. The visual thinkers, they were warned. And but that makes me really, really upset.
Well, again, I want to say thank you to you because, Abraham Lincoln, I think the quote that they give to Abraham Lincoln, he said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." And so I always tell people that if agriculture has taught me anything, it's taught me that if you want to know what the future is, you've got to grow it.
Well, we also have got to get people that, we've got to get people out there that know what's actually going on and not have all this abstract thinking. Okay, how do we fix those power plants? I'm just telling you how I would go about doing. I'm going to rank them in after I've gotten down to the maintenance shop and gotten away from the suits. Then I'm going to find out exactly what froze.
But Dr. Grandin, that's why we need people like you. We need
them, and the problem is that too many people like me are getting shunted in special ed, and I just talked to a teacher yesterday that not yesterday, this is the day before yesterday at this career fair, where they wouldn't let her students take shop class, because they were special ed kids. Well, I worked with plenty of shop people that I know were autistic that had 20 patents each.
Well, your willingness to come on the show, there's no telling how many young people, how many educators, how many stakeholders are going to get to hear your incredible message. And as a result, I hope that they heard it. I hope that they see it. And I hope that they go out and encourage somebody to be the next incredible leader that you have become.
Well, and I want to see the kids that are different be successful. We also need these skills. You know, we've got infrastructure that's falling apart, and it's going to be the visual thinkers that are going to keep it going. Like just something as simple as the elevator. Who's going to keep the elevators working? My friend got her hand stuck in a door. That's serious.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, it's not good.
No.
And
Well, it's
those
preventable.
mechanisms, in the glass elevators, I looked at mechanisms on those doors, and they need to be kept serviced.
Well, Dr. Grandin, I appreciate your time today. Is there any other words of wisdom?
No, I just want to help all I'm going to say is the world needs all the different kinds of minds. They have complementary skills, because we need verbal thinkers too, because in most of these businesses, there was a verbal thinker that had to run the business, payroll, all that stuff, just keep it running, because us visual thinkers, we tend to be kind of disorganized. But you need all the different kinds of minds. Verbal thinking is very linear. I tend to be all around associative thinking. But the first step is to realize different kinds of thinking exist, sort of visual, mathematical, and word, and then look at how they can work together with complementary skills. And when we did this book, my co-author, Betsy, a totally verbal person, we were a great team, because I'd write the rough drafts and Betsy would, smooth them all out, change a lot of stuff in them. And we were a great team, recognizing our differences and use them in a complementary manner.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the Growing Our Future podcast. Again, we're just honored to bring on incredible subject matter experts, people that are willing to share, to pour into others, to encourage others, to help others see the possibilities of personal and career greatness. Today was no different. Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed being on the podcast.